but you should actually get rid of franking credits altogether and just have a lower, flatter company tax rate. And the reason for that is because we cannot compete with offshore capital. We currently have an onshore tax rate of 30 cents in the dollar, but our offshore tax rates, depending on tax treaty, are between, generally speaking, with most of our trading partners or major trading partners, is between 0 and 15 cents in the dollar. And what that does is that creates what they call a taxation arbitrage, where the rate of tax on onshore profits is 30 cents and the rate of tax on offshore profits is between 0 and 15. So what that does is encourage companies to shift their profits offshore. And we saw that just recently. I think the tax office has cracked down on this, but for a long time, for most of this century, the three major iron ore companies had marketing hubs for their iron ore in Singapore. Now, Singapore has never produced, as far as I'm aware, 1 tonne of iron ore, but yet somehow these people were the experts in selling it on to China. That was nothing but a tax scheme to shift profits onshore or offshore into Singapore. And it's that profit shifting that we need to stop. And the only way we can do that is ideally by lifting the rate of withholding tax. And I noticed earlier today Senator Walsh was talking about streaming. Well, let me tell you, there is no greater streaming in this country when it comes to taxation than the streaming of profits offshore for a much lower rate of tax than what someone, a good patriotic company who wants to keep their profits onshore has to pay here. And we need to deal with this taxation arbitrage because it is killing the ability of companies who have their domestic equity here in Australia to compete, and that's mainly small business, to compete with offshore businesses. So we have to look at fixing that. And I'll actually want to give you a couple of examples of how the system's being rorted. I have here a copy of Google's accounts from 2020. And their overall income for the year ending, and you've got to pay for this, by the way. This isn't public. You can get it, but you've got to pay about $50 or $60 for a set of these accounts. In 2019, Google had $1.2 billion in revenue, and they ended up making a paltry $133 million. So their operating margin was about 10%. So in other words, that's means that their cost of doing business here was about 90 cents in the dollar. I would find that very hard to believe that Google would be incurring 90 cents in every dollar they earn here. But what they do is they basically boost or increase their above-the-line profits offshore, interest, royalties and rent, because they know that if it's paid offshore to the US, they don't have to pay 30 cents in the dollar because the withholding tax rates with most for most items with the US is somewhere between 0 and 10 cents. And I've got another one here from my favourite company, Pfizer. Their 2022 total revenue was almost 1.4 billion, and yet they only made $90 million profit for that year. So their operating margin was only 7%. Now, if you compare that to their worldwide set of accounts, they made $100 billion in revenue and had an operating profit before tax of 34 cents in the dollar. So you have to ask yourself why Pfizer had an operating profit of 34% or an operating ratio of 34% on their worldwide income, but here in Australia their operating profit was only 7%. And the reason for that is that they shifted their profits, or their above-the-line profits, interest, royalties and rent, offshore. And ironically enough, it was shifted offshore to Ireland, because if you actually go and look at their related party balances for the year end with Ireland, and that's the trick, you've always got to go and look at the related party transactions, because what often happens is they'll shift those profits offshore to a subsidiary, or it might be a holding. If we look at their related party transactions for Pfizer Service Company Ireland, $1.1 billion. So now I know this because my father-in-law caught COVID and they gave him a dose of that Molnupiravir, and on the box it was $1,000. Pfizer want you to believe that it cost $930 of the $1,000 sale to make that tablet, and they only made a tiny 7% profit, or a $70 profit on that $1,000 tablet. I don't think so. That is profit shifting 101. And I've already written to the Treasurer about this, and I'm looking forward to getting a reply, because that is a breakdown in our transfer pricing. And those of you who follow tax will know from a few years ago, Chevron got busted, and they actually got, the reason why they got busted, it's always very hard to prove transfer pricing, but Chevron got busted because they had intercompany loans charging the Australian business 9% interest when the current interest rates are about 2 or 3%. And the only reason they got caught was there was an email from one of their staff actually talking about a scheme to actually avoid paying tax by bumping up the interest paid here in Australia and shifting it offshore. And they got caught under Part 4A of the Income Tax Act. But all of this stuff is very traceable. So for those of you who do their tax return and might have a rental property, you'll do a rental property schedule. If you have a capital gain, you'll do a capital gain schedule. If you have transactions with offshore businesses, you actually have to do what's known as an international dealing schedule. And all of that is actually recorded by the tax office, and they are quite capable of tracing this information. And you'll see here on page 3 of the international dealing schedule, I actually ask these questions. Did you have any related party dealings involving royalties or licence fees? Did you have any related party dealings involving rent or leasing? Did you have any service arrangements with international related parties? And you'll remember the name of that Irish company was called the Pfizer Service Company. And the reason why they like to go through Ireland is Ireland has a company tax rate of 12.5%. And of course the EU isn't too happy with that either. And I think, was it Apple was forced to pay $20 billion or something? Because what happens, because they've got such a low company tax rate, is all the companies set up their head offices in low taxing jurisdictions, and that's one of the reasons why I'm adamantly against having giving income tax rights back to the states, because I can assure you that head offices will all come back to Canberra, where Canberra will, the ACT, and they'll just charge a very low company tax rate. And we do not want a system here in Australia like they've got in the States, whereby a lot of the head office companies are set up in Delaware. So I think I do look forward, and I've offered my services to whoever wants to take it because of my experience in tax, about how to reform the tax system.
Authorised G. Rennick, LNP Chermside.